Last month I released a video comparing the lack of branches on Toronto's subway system with other subway systems around the world. There's a magic link up here, and I'll put a link down in the description so you can find it when you finish watching this video. And a bunch of people filled up the comments section talking about terms like subway and metro and light rail. What are these things? The most common comment had to do with my comparison between Toronto and Montreal, where they call their subway system the métro. They also have a light rail line called the REM, or Réseau Express Métropolitain, and a whole bunch of people commented on that, said, it's not light rail, it's a subway, or it's a metro. Well, we'll come back to that. Sometimes it's easy to figure out what something is. For instance,
the domestic feline is commonly called a house cat.
That's my little girl Naira. And yes, she's adorable. But Hinterland Who's Who doesn't cover higher order transit, so I will. And let me just warn you, some of these terms are going to get increasingly nebulous as we go along.
Subway, metro, light rail, streetcar, tram. One thing they all are is at least one step down the ladder from commuter rail, like GO trains. As you go down the ladder, you'll usually see some trends, though these are guidelines with exceptions rather than hard and fast rules. You go from large trains to single vehicles, and from larger vehicles to smaller vehicles. Passenger capacity decreases. For instance, a GO train can carry a few thousand people versus a bit over 1,000 on a Toronto subway train, a few hundred on our LRTs, and 100 and change on one of our streetcars. Stations get closer together, from typically several kilometers for commuter rail down to a few hundred meters lower down the ladder. And while the higher forms usually have full-blown stations, as you move down you may find more basic stops and nothing at all toward the bottom. Often the area served gets smaller. All of the GO train lines are at least tens of kilometers long and extend well outside Toronto, while each step down often covers a shorter distance than the ones above it. So let's start with subway and metro. They're really just different terms for the same thing, heavy rail transit. Heavy doesn't necessarily refer to weight, although at well over 30 tons per car, even empty, you wouldn't want a Toronto subway vehicle landing on you. But it's more about the passenger load the system can handle. As I mentioned in my previous video, the term metro originated with the first line of what today is the London Underground, the Metropolitan Railway. Paris borrowed that name for their Métropolitain, or métro for short, and that became the generic name for this type of transit in much of the world. New York called theirs the subway because it ran under, or sub, the road, or way, and subway became the most common term in English-speaking parts of North America. This isn't the only regional difference we'll encounter in this video, and it's worth noting that each term is used for some systems even in areas where the other term is more common. The term subway can be a bit misleading though because it gets applied to these things whether they actually are subterranean or not. I did a video about how sub Toronto's subway system is, links in the usual places, and while our system is mostly sub, each one of the three lines has at least a small section that isn't. The bottom line is that if it's a heavy rail transit system in a place where such things are called subways, it's probably called a subway no matter how much of it actually is below ground. But the worldwide generic term is metro, so that's what I'm going to use for the rest of this video. Metros are expected to be fully grade separated. That doesn't necessarily mean grading as in height relative to the surface of the earth, but it means that they have a right-of-way that is completely separate from things like roads and pedestrian paths. No running down the middle of a street, no intersection with roads, and so on.
The next rung down the ladder is light metro. It's pretty much what you'd expect of a metro, just lighter. It often uses shorter trains, smaller vehicles, or both. But other than that, it has similar attributes that you'd expect to find on a metro, such as similar spacing between stations and full grade separation. Coming back to Montreal's Métro and REM, one of my commenters pointed out that the vehicles for the REM are actually a bit bigger than the vehicles for the Métro. So in that regard, if you call the Métro a metro, then so is the REM. And they're both fully grade separated. The Métro runs entirely underground because its rubber-tired vehicles can't cope with the outside world, while the REM mostly runs on or above the surface. A big difference, though, is that the Métro trains are much longer than the REM trains, which are only 2 or 4 vehicles, giving the REM a capacity around a quarter to a half that of the Métro. So in that regard, the REM could be called a light metro. And this is a problem we're going to keep seeing throughout this video. A lot of these terms are pretty squishy. There's no definitive checklist you can look at that will put every system into one box and only one box.
Next is light rail. The basic idea is that it's another step lighter, often using single vehicles or trains of no more than a few vehicles, and possibly with vehicles smaller than metro vehicles. This combination results in lower capacity. And that's another example of squishiness. The REM's shorter, lower capacity trains kinda fit that. Along with the difference in vehicles, the stops on light rail are often spaced closer together, which means it's more likely to have a stop closer to where you are, but at the cost of slower travel because it has to stop more often. Before I go on with light rail, let's talk about light rail versus streetcars versus trams. Streetcar is probably the easiest of the three. It runs at least partly on tracks in the street that share space with other uses, traditionally road vehicles, but in some cases also pedestrian malls. But even there, we run into some issues. Some of Toronto's streetcar routes run on a dedicated right-of-way in or beside the road, and some of them even have been referred to as LRTs at times, yet they use the same streetcar vehicles and they're numbered as streetcar lines. See? Squishy. And then there's the word tram. That's what most of the rest of the world calls streetcars. But also, in some cases, systems that we might call LRTs with their own dedicated right-of-way, not shared with cars or pedestrians, are also called trams. Squishy. Back to light rail. One meaning of light rail is as a blanket category that includes streetcars and trams as well as systems like Toronto's LRTs. Basically anything that's too light to call a metro or light metro. But it's also sometimes used in a way that sets it apart from streetcars and some trams by requiring a dedicated right-of-way, like our two LRT lines. That right-of-way may or may not be fully grade separated. The REM, for instance, is fully grade separated. Both of our LRT lines are not, as they have intersections with cross streets, but the right-of-way itself isn't shared. Squishy.
So now you understand why there are so many disagreements about what to call some of these systems. A lot of the terms are kind of squishy, they're not all that well defined, they overlap, some of them even have more than one meaning. You could make arguments in favor of calling Montreal's REM a metro, a light metro, or light rail. Our former Scarborough RT here in Toronto was numbered as part of the subway system, but it was definitely not more than a light metro. And you can make a pretty good case for calling it light rail, based on its short trains of small vehicles with a similar capacity to the two new LRT lines here in Toronto. Clear as mud, right? And so the arguments will continue. But at least now you have an understanding of why there are disagreements over these squishy terms. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe.